So how bad will this Donald Trump clown show market and economy get? That's the subject of today's video, and there's a lot to go over. I want to walk you through it, and let's just jump right in. So this is the headlines coming from the Fed. It says senior Federal Reserve official puts 50-50 odds on tariffs sparking sustained U.S. inflation. Now they're saying 50-50 odds of sustained inflation. However, both scenarios seem to be inflation this summer. Let me read and I'll explain what's going on. It says here, a senior federal official has put the chances that Donald Trump's trade war leads to a sustained burst of inflation at 50-50, as he warned U.S. rate setters would face uncertainty right through the summer. St. Louis Fed President Alberto Mussolem told the Financial Times that while Trump's levies could boost inflation for a quarter or two, right? So looking through the summer here, and even, you can see even through December, there was an equal likely scenario where the impact of tariffs on prices could last longer. So they're basically saying prices are going to be up for the rest of the year and likely 50-50 chance for longer. That's why I want to start with that. And we just got a jobs report. Trump is already calling for the Fed to cut rates. It looks like it's not going to happen. This is coming from Barron's, their headline. The bottom line of the jobs report, no rush for the Fed to cut rates. Basically, there's tons of uncertainty out there, be it with the trade war, immigration policy, all of these things he's trying to do with executive orders and his crazy things with this DOJ. I understand, guys, that this is the headline today, and I'm talking about it, but I just want to cover everything, not just a couple things. For example, here, this is Kilmar Abrego. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is returned to U.S. and charged with human smuggling. So before, remember, this was the guy who was sent to El Salvador, so they brought him back, and now they're charging him with something. It's interesting because before they seemed so certain on all of this stuff, and now they're bringing him back, and this is like an old charge. So we'll see how this ends up playing out. I do think it's important to track this story because certainly you don't want to ignore people's civil rights, nor get rid of due process, but I do want to put it all in the larger context because I think a lot of the focus will be on this and not enough on regular people's lives and the economy. So for example, this was a big headline. Again, this is sort of brushed under the rug, even though it's an important one. Over 7 million Americans are unemployed, the most since 2017. Why it won't get any better anytime soon. Again, it's tariffs, 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 right? I'm sure you guys know this. Trump's basically declared war on the rest of the world. And there was a comment coming in from the community, which I thought was a good one, saying that, you don't have to be an economist or an expert to understand that declaring war on basically all the other countries is not necessarily a good strategy for success. And I think you guys understand that. On top of that, let's read a little bit more here. It says the unemployment rate is still quite low at 4.2%, but it's almost a full percentage point higher than it was a few years ago, when it matched a half a century low of 3.4%. So historically speaking, you could argue that 4.2% is a little bit low, but if we're going to go back to the historical mean, certainly there could be more job losses on the horizon, and you have Trump's uncertain economy with the tariffs. That's why I'm talking about this stuff. It could get a lot uglier. The rising number of people who can't find work is a sign of how much harder it is to get a job. The difficulty in finding work has also shown up in other surveys of the economy. The number of people collecting unemployment checks, for instance, recently hit a 4-year high. You also have unemployed people are also receiving benefits for a longer period of time as their job search drags on. And then what's not mentioned here, but I think you guys know this stuff already, there's people who are either underemployed, meaning that, yes, you have a job, but it just doesn't pay enough to, pay for the food, rent, fuel, these kind of things as costs go up. That's why I mentioned the inflation at the get-go, right? Could get really ugly. So even if you have a job, you guys know it's ugly out there. On top of that, there are various companies report this from time to time. I'm just showing you the last couple of days. Winnebago says job cuts are coming. So it's like an RV company. Also, P&G, Procter & Gamble, set to cut thousands of jobs, right? So I know it's not fun to talk about this stuff. It can be a bit depressing, but I just want to be honest with you about these kind of things because you can get lost in the clown show of, Trump fighting Musk and it's haha funny, but there are real consequences to the stuff that Trump does. And you have to understand that, again, this is part of a global system. So it's not just how Trump is affecting the USA, it's going to be how he's affecting the world. And unfortunately, everyone has to pay attention to this ridiculous situation. And I know, guys, we can cry over spilt milk, over, how did this guy get in the office in the first place, et cetera. But always to say this, midterms are coming. And, you know, we saw this stuff coming a mile away, meaning that economists were talking about all of these things that Trump was proposing and all of the, you know, possible ramifications. Now we're seeing it live, and it's frankly worse than people had even imagined, even though we already predicted it would be bad, but it's even worse. And this is something that I didn't even know. I had a feeling, but I didn't even know this one. This came out today. Cards in the deck. Trump keeps stack of orders ready to play as needed. So what we're talking about here is executive orders, or sort of plans that they already have written. He went over with his lawyers, wrote this stuff out. I have a feeling all this stuff is written by AI, to be perfectly frank. And basically, depending on sort of what the news of the day is, he'll just do whatever executive order to kind of distract people from what he's really up to, being it his crypto stuff and trying to, you know, put money in his own pockets, right? That's what I mentioned. I'm not ignoring the Kilmar thing. I think it's important, but you have to put it in a larger perspective, right? Sometimes he'll do stuff just for smoke screens. So that's why the executive order thing, meaning that he's got a bunch of stuff ready to go whenever it's appropriate. And when you read the details, you'll kind of make sense. You'll see. It says here, throughout Trump's second term, White House staff have maintained a stash of executive orders and proclamations they can deploy depending on the themes of the moment and the narratives they want to shape, right? So they got all this stuff pre-written. It's just basically ways to sort of, you know, flood the zone, control the news cycle, basically, right? A senior White House official said, speaking on a condition of anonymity, to talk frankly about internal strategies. Some orders are put into the calendar well in advance. Others are teed up the night before they are signed, depending on impulse, political strategy. That's how they're running that's how they're running their show over there, and the overall mood within the White House. So they got essentially like emergency, you know, ways to distract people, or, you know, do things that are likely going to get struck down by the courts, but it keeps everyone, you know, busy. So like, hey, you know, look at what my left hand's doing, and don't look at what my right hand's doing, kind of stuff. It's like, it's you know, how con artists work. It's the same thing with, like, you know, you're walking down the street and you see the person with the 3 cups and they try to, you know, basically scam you. You guys know this kind of stuff. It's the stuff they're pulling here. And what's interesting, because I've noticed this quite a bit, and I can't talk about it every single day, but it's really noticeable. Say, I don't know, the last month or so, the dollar's really going down. And one of the ramifications of this is if you have inflation going up, you have tariffs, right? Basically means cost of imports are going to go up, right? So use the example of bananas, because if you watch my last video, they were talking about bananas with Lutnick, and Lutnick said, oh, well, you know, you just got to build your bananas here, right? But like some things you just can't, right? You can't produce those in mass quantities in USA. It's the same with coffee or whatever, you know, various spices. You could talk about, you know, auto parts, all sorts of supply chains and products that just aren't readily or easily made in USA. So raising tariffs / taxes on those is going to raise the cost for you. And then when the dollar going down, it's going to reduce your buying power of foreign goods, right? So all these things have ramifications, right? So this is an important one, and don't sleep on this thing. And I'm going to tell you guys, I'm abroad here in Korea, and I can just tell you, it's very noticeable when the dollar goes down. It's very, very noticeable. The dollar's decline is a stealth inflation problem. I'm going to read a little bit just for those of you who are unaware of this, because it is an important story. The administration seems unaware that the U.S. is highly dependent on the kindness of foreigners to finance its budget and current account deficit. Indeed, foreigners own nearly $9 trillion, or roughly a third of outstanding U.S. Treasury debt. There's also a administration noticed that foreigners are getting uneasy about their about their large dollar exposure. Case in point, global gold prices have sharply risen, and dollar has lost value as long-term U.S. Treasury bonds yields are rising, and you'll see that in the bond market. They'll refer to this stuff, you know, be it, I think it's, I want to say it's UK, China, and Japan have a lot of U.S. debt. And then a lot of the hedge funds have been dumping U.S. bonds as well. And Trump's whole budget and tax thing looks to be deficit spending, adding debt to the national, national debt. And essentially, we're hitting record levels, like levels in say the 1940s, but we're not in wartime right now. So it is a really crazy situation that Trump is putting us in. Also, you're getting tariffs as high as like what the 1930s, which sent us into the Great Depression. We're talking about just like once in 100 years kind of stuff. I think you guys know this stuff, but I just want to put it all in together. Read a little bit more here. It says, economic forecasts that focus solely on tariffs miss these effects, talking about the declining dollar. But there is little difference between how, say, a 10% across the board tariff impacts consumer prices and how a 10% dollar depreciation might affect consumer prices, right? Both the increase the cost of imported goods. And then you got this, whenever I look at what's going on in the markets, you get these stupid crypto stuff like, oh, the hottest crypto now is, I guess, is something, what is this? Some IPO called of Circle, something called Circle, that's literally what they called. And, this is part of what Trump and Musk pumps up this stuff as well. And it says, oh, well, economy's bad. And so what we got to do is we got to cut taxes for the rich people. And we got to give these people, from out of the country, foreign, these golden, Trump golden visa things, and give us $5 million and you can set up whatever data center and crypto thing. Like their whole solution is basically a bunch of hot air. Like this is a massive, massive bubble. On top of that, you'll get this stuff. And this is all just coming out the last couple of days. And so I want to catch you up to stuff what's happening. Private markets are crowding out public markets. Where's the SEC? Right. So if you understand our stock market, right? The idea is that people will invest in the USA because things are public. Things are hopefully trustworthy, right? Books are open, the markets are fair, etc. When you start rushing everything into private markets where there's less transparency, less open books, you don't know exactly what your money's doing. People don't necessarily disclose all the things that they're doing with your said money. The SEC is not regulating any kind of insider trading or any sort of shenanigans going on, right? The Trump people keep saying, oh, wow, all these regulations, and Musk says all the same thing all the time as well. All these regulations is getting in the way of innovation. And, what's the innovation they talk about? Well, crypto and data centers that are going to basically take all the power from local neighborhoods, and they're going to just basically produce a bunch of hot air that doesn't provide any value to society. Like when your whole economy is based on this kind of thing, it doesn't lend for a very good future. I'm just being frank with you guys. And this is sort of why, yes, guys, I don't want to ignore it. That's why I keep mentioning it. Yes, I understand. We're going to talk about the Kilmar case for probably the next couple of weeks, but don't ignore the economy. Don't ignore jobs. Don't ignore this kind of stuff. And what I was thinking about today, and for those of you who have read The Great Gatsby, and most people who've graduated U.S. high schools, should have read it. Actually, should have, because everyone reads in high school. But this is like a required book. It's considered the greatest book written in American history, at least top 5. But I think it's considered the greatest. It's my favorite book, American book by American writer. And if you understand why I'm bringing this up, you'll get it. Right? This is basically about the Roaring 20s, that sort of era of decadence. People were throwing these massive parties, etc. And the theme of the book, though, is that money can't buy happiness. And oftentimes, these sort of wealthy individuals live this life of illusions, right? It's all about appearances. And that really captures sort of the Musk and the Trumpy era, or era of social media, these kind of things. I get it more than guys. I do YouTube every single day, and I make a point, if you ever watch my videos, like, they're uncut. I literally just sit down and chat with you guys, this kind of stuff. But most channels out there, it's like cut. A lot of it's fake. They make a bunch of, swarmy jokes or whatever, these kind of things. And very, very few things are real anymore in this day and age. And I was thinking about, this reminds me of the warnings of the book, of a book like something like The Great Gatsby. One of the things that you want to be thinking about in your life and in your future is how to sort of not get caught up in all of the drama and all of the hottest trends, etc., because ultimately it does come to an end. And so that's sort of where I see things in the market. I don't think everything's going to explode exactly, because there's certainly going to be people who see it coming, and there's people who aren't going to see it coming. But that's sort of why I go through, as many things as I possibly can, because when you kind of put it all together, you're like, oh, okay, I kind of see what kind of game plan that Trump is running, or I kind of see where the money's flowing and how it's unsustainable, right? You can kind of predict this kind of stuff. Also, if you haven't, and I'm just talking about books right now, you haven't checked out my book, it's called Positive Angle. I talk a lot about these kind of things. I've been there, done that. I've seen it quite a bit. I lived through the dot-com bubble. I lived through the 08, 09 crash. I remember this stuff, right? And one thing I will say is that regardless of what Trump does, and maybe it's going to get ugly this summer, maybe it'll be ugly for the next year or so. I keep saying midterms are coming. These things do go in cycles, and Trump won't be around forever. It's impossible, right? This just merely by age, he'll be gone, and hopefully the culture with that I can't predict, right? Are we going to stay in this sort of Trumpy world forever, where we're going to you know, sort of just fake facade, worship of money, this kind of stuff. I don't know. That part I can't predict, but I know that I can control how I think about the things, and I know that I can control that I'm not going to get sucked into that stuff. And you don't have to either, because ultimately, I'll just tell you the truth about these things. If you live a life like a Trump or Musk or any of that kind of ilk, they may seem, you know, great in appearances. Maybe they got, you know, fancy clothes or whatever, but deep down inside, they're really, really unhappy people, and they surround themselves with people who are doing, you know, lots of substance abuses, any number of things. No one actually really likes these people. They don't have any true friends, and it's just not any way to live. And on top of that, they have multiple divorces, multiple kids, of all these things. And I mention this stuff because it adds up. And again, I just don't think this is sustainable. So I hope you guys understand what's going on. This was the lead, and I want to talk about the money, the economy, and sort of the culture that goes along with it. I do appreciate your time, everyone. Please share your thoughts on this, and I'll catch you all in the next video.